One of the burning issues on the internet today is security. Nigeria does not want to be left behind, so she has taken a step towards protecting her citizens by coming up with the Cyber Crime Act 2015. Here's the opening paragraph of this act. The objectives of this act are to A, provide an effective and unified legal, regulatory and institutional framework for the prohibition, prevention, detection, prosecution and punishment of cyber crimes in Nigeria. B, ensure the protection of critical national information infrastructure, and C, promote cybersecurity and the protection of the computer systems and networks, electronic communications, data and computer programs, including intellectual property and privacy rights. I wonder if my guest agrees that this law is able to provide comprehensive cybersecurity for Nigerians. Basil Udotai is the managing partner of Technology Advisors and lead consultant. Welcome to Tech Trends.
Thank you very much.
Would you say this act as we have it today is adequate?
I would like to take it from the preamble of the act itself that says it promises a unified legal, regulatory, and institutional framework. If that's the promise the act made, I think the act itself has failed itself, and the drafters has failed the country because the framework is not unified. The law enforcement strategy framework promises, sort of the provision is for all law enforcement agencies to enforce this act. That's where the act misses. In terms of the content, in terms of whether issues of access control is covered, whether issues of forgery, the content is covered, interception, and so on and so forth, to that extent I agree. But we have to have that unified single framework that the act promised.
Okay, so it's one thing to have this sort of law, it's another thing to enforce the law.
Yes.
How would this law be enforced considering the way things are today?
Now, the way the law is drafted, it says that all relevant law enforcement agencies shall enforce the act. Now, not only is that wrong, it is also unprecedented. You see, the structure of our law enforcement framework in Nigeria is this, that an act is isolated in a legislation, an institution is created, and that institution is now enabled, conferred with the authority to enforce that particular act, whether it runs into 100 provisions or not. You see that in ICPC handling corruption-related offenses, EFCC, economic crime, NAFDAC, is a law enforcement agency to the extent that it looks at pharmaceutical infraction, and NDLEA looked at narcotics. So if you look at the whole environment in our law enforcement tradition, really, you would not find an issue of this nature where all law enforcement agencies are authorized to enforce. It's like calling all cooks to the kitchen. And you know what they say, too many cooks spoil the broth. We have to go back to that original tradition, which is also the prevailing circumstance in the country today, that each agency is given the authority to enforce each crime.
So somebody is caught for sending out phishing emails. Or for example, let's even use a more recent example. The recent GMD of NNPC put up a Facebook, a full page advert saying that he's not the owner of a particular Facebook account. Now, is that kind of situation covered under this particular act? Absolutely.
But it also happened to the one of the deputy governors of the CBN recently, who also came out, full page ad to say, oh, I don't even have a Facebook account. So whoever is parading himself or herself on Facebook pretending to be me is not me. What that tells me once I saw that was that people are not aware that since May 15, 2015, we now have a cybercrime law where actions like this, which is simple identity impersonation, is either people are not aware that we have that framework now where people can complain and take these acts to agencies, or the provision in the law which creates this multiple agency enforcement framework creates a challenge for individuals as to who to report to, where to take this matter to. And the fact that no sensitization has been done, I'm not sure anybody is even aware from operator standpoint and citizens suffering all kinds of violations and being victimized online. I'm not sure they are aware that there's a law that touches on all of these actions. And I don't think they know who to go to. In fact, if you ask me, I cannot tell you which agency is ready right now.
I was going to ask you that question, that if somebody violate somebody's right on the internet, who should be the first point of call as of today?
On the basis of this act, I cannot tell, because it says all law enforcement agencies shall enforce. I don't know whether to look at the value of the act to say, is it stealing? So I now go to the police. Is it copyright? So I now go to the copyright agency. Is it, privacy? So I will now go to, whoever. The lesson here, CFA, is that we have to find a mechanism within the law and create a streamlined approach towards enforcement of cybercrime, just like we've done for all other offenses in the country.
So at this point in time, now we found ourselves in this. Okay, well, the first step is that we now have a law, however imperfect. Now, how should we now? Because security on the internet is actually a big deal all over the world.
It is.
And it's getting
even more complicated.
Every blessed day, things are happening.
Yes.
So, what should we be doing at this point, and how can we get it to the point where people would actually be fully protected on the internet? Now,
the beautiful thing is that the law, you're right, no matter how terrible the provisions seem, we have a law now that criminalize undesirable online actions, and which gives Nigeria an opportunity to develop jurisprudence on this issue. Now, what can be done can also issue from the Act. There's a mechanism for creating some kind of order, regulation, and so on and so forth. So there's a regulatory mandate uniquely embedded in the law, but the mandate is conferred on the Attorney General of the Federation. If I have a chance to advise the Attorney General when he's appointed, what I would tell him to do is to take a look at the law and agree with us in the tech community that this law is bad if it is enforced the way it is drafted. Now, sadly, it is already a law. There's really nothing we can do in terms of amending it right now. What the AG can do is to say, at least I have a mandate to issue regulation, some kind of instrument that will be respected under this act. So he can say, this provision is bad, it's too technology specific for a criminal law, it's too transactional for a criminal law, so we will not enforce these provisions. Now, the rest of the provisions that are generic, technology neutral, and will be effective to combat some of these challenges would go. We will enforce those. But in terms of the enforcement formula or strategy, I can now issue a regulation that either selects of all the law enforcement agencies to say, this guy, the police, the SSS, whoever, would now be the central institution to enforce this act. Or by regulation, I can now create a committee of sorts, to say a combination of all law enforcement agencies coming under one umbrella created by regulation to enforce the Cybercrime Act. That way, we can now have a midway approach where we begin to look at the law and at the same time work with the National Assembly to actually have an an amendment.
Before I let you go, there's this part of the law that I encourage Nigerians to go get a copy of that law and take a look at it, because if you use the internet, if you use your banking details, whatever you do that is online, you need to know that law because it affects you somehow. So I have a copy. And so I went through it and I saw a portion where it talked about some cybersecurity fund. Who's going to manage that fund?
Yeah, that's very tricky, but I'll tell you the vision behind the fund. The vision was that since security is everybody's business, the idea was that at a transaction point, a Nigerian should be given a chance to contribute to security. Very minimal amount, minuscule actually, going from 1 naira to 100 naira. So when you go to your ATM or you do a top-up. Compulsorily, that was the vision. The vision was to do it in such a way that it is so unobtrusive that it will not affect our ability to transact.
But it will be legal, the person will know.
It will be, of course, everybody would know, that the idea is for you to take ownership of security online, because if you don't do an online transaction, then you're safe. But how many of us are not doing online transactions?
Because even if you don't do online, you do ATM. And ATM has a way to...
ATM is also online. Online in the sense that it's technology, it's digital. Now, the idea was that if we take all transactions, which in 2008 was said to be about almost 6 billion per year, Nigerian online at that time. So now we'll be looking at 20 or 30 billion. The idea was that if you take 100 naira times the amount of transaction per year, that's the sort of resource you have, financial resource, to handle this issue. And if Nigerians agree and they don't feel the impact, they would sort of take this charge as their own, and we would now have the resource and not bother the National Assembly with appropriating money for this. But in the way it is implemented, really, not only was the whole vision thwarted, because now you have a 0.000.5% of the cost of transaction, linking it to value of transaction, which is terrible. States get their derivation from the Federation online. So if you pay billions of naira to a state like my state, Akwa Ibom State, which I understand still gets the highest revenue from the federal government, that means 0.0005% of that goes to the fund. And you know, if you look at the provision of the act, you see that the fund manager is not being set up. There's no framework for, you know, even identifying who should handle the management, how the money should be spent, and so on and so forth. I don't know, maybe it's one of those things that the AG can also look at through regulation.
Well, Pasi, I'm sure there's never enough time to talk about this. I'm sure I'm going to have you come back here. Let's talk about this one more time.
It will be a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on today's edition of the show.
Thanks a lot.
All right, you've heard it. The Cyber Crime Act has been passed. It's now a law. You can actually enforce the law. But then there's some areas that need to be ironed out. We'll be right back. It's a wrap on today's edition of Tech Trends, but the conversation continues online. You can watch the entire show on the Channels TV YouTube account or via my blog. See you next time.